Welcome to the Heart-Led Business Show, where compassion meets commerce and leaders lead with love. Join your host, Tom Jacobs, as he delves into the insightful conversations with visionary business leaders who defy the status quo, putting humanity first and profit second. From heartfelt strategies to inspiring stories, this podcast is your compass in the world of conscious capitalism. So buckle up and let your heart guide your business journey.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, adventurers and dreamers alike, strap on your explorer hats as we get ready for a heart-pumping journey with the extraordinary Mike Brcic. A serial entrepreneur with a soul as big as the great outdoors, Mike is the genius behind Wayfinders, where he helps fellow trailblazers live purposefully through community and adventure. And not only that, but he also has an amazing podcast, A Wayfinder's Guide to Life. And today, we'll dive into his heart-led business and discover how he's crafting connections in some of the wildest corners of the world. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Tom, I've been looking forward to this for a while, so I'm thrilled about this chat.
I am too. And ever since we were introduced by another podcaster, Jordan Harbinger, I've been listening to your podcast as well. And like I said in the pre-show, it's so good and just talks directly to people like me and probably a lot of the rest of your audience. So really well done on that and really getting into my heart. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But of course, our first question out of the bag always is, what's your definition of a heart-led business?
Yeah, thanks. I might widen this definition of heart-led to include this concept of the soul, which I think obviously ties in with heart. But it is something that I've written extensively about. It's something that I've been exploring on a personal level for several years now. I'm currently rereading a book by James Hollis, who is an amazing Jungian analyst and writer. He was recently on the Huberman podcast. I was thrilled to see him get the recognition he deserves. And he talks about this shift from moving from the first half of our life, which is generally spent living according to the scripts that were laid out to us by others, our parents, our teachers, society, whatever. We fulfill expectations and obligations. And then at some point that starts to lose its sheen. Maybe we have the vaunted midlife crisis, so to speak, and we get woken up. And then our task is to discover, what is our life to live? Who am I at my core, and how can I live life from that place instead of the messages that I've been taught? And he uses the word soul as shorthand for that place, that who we are at our core, which I think is the same as being heart-led and being soul-led, really tapping into who we are at our core and living life from that place. To me, a definition of a heart-led business or a soul-led business is one where it springs forth from a really true, honest, authentic aspect of ourselves, and one in which we are expressing our gifts in the world and our passions, and that we are generally living from a place of service rather than validation or achievement or financial. The financial piece is obviously important, but financial goals at the expense of anything to do with the heart or the soul ultimately are going to leave one hollow. I've walked this path with hundreds of entrepreneurs over the last 8 years and prior to that. And it's amazing to me how people will pursue that path and they'll reach the next milestone. Maybe it's 1 million or maybe it's 10 million or whatever. And they'll think that's the pot of gold at the rainbow. And when I get there, everything will be great. Problems will go away. I'll feel fulfillment at my core and peace. And then they get there and, the view's no different from this mountain. But maybe I haven't climbed a high enough mountain. So maybe now I need to get to 100 million or a billion or whatever the next one may be. And then at some point, after many years or maybe decades of chasing, they realize the ultimate futility of it. And they start to ask themselves, what is my life to live? What is my business to lead? So that is my answer to your question.
I love that. And connecting the soul in with the heart, it totally makes sense because you always say it's the heart and soul of the business. It's great. I love what you said about leading with service versus leading for validation. Can you unpack that for us just a little bit?
Sure. I'll tell you a personal story. My previous company, we've chatted about this. It was called Sacred Rides, still operates to this day. I sold it 6 years ago. We led high-end mountain bike trips around the world. And by 2013, I'd already been leading it for 16 or 17 years. And it had been growing steadily. But I was impatient with that growth. And I wanted to put some gas on the fire. And I was fully bought in to that world. It's like scale, hustle, grow, all that kind of stuff. I was fully bought in, believed that was the path to nirvana. And so in 2013, that was the first time I raised money from investors. And then I did it again in 2014 and then again in 2016. I took on more debt. I hired the team. We grew all over the world. In 2016, I set a goal of the big, hairy, audacious goal. It's this term from the world of business. And I set this BHAG of by 2021, want to be operating in 150 countries. I look back at this now laughably, but I wanted to be on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. And I developed the business strategy to help us get there. Basically, launched a whole new side of the business, this software platform, kind of like Airbnb for mountain bike guides around the world. We expanded to 45 new countries in the span of 6 months. From the outside, it looked like this was just an incredible success. We were getting media attention. We were well on pace to hit our goal. Obviously, at some point, it slows down a little bit. It's hard to run mountain bike trips in Sierra Leone, but we were pushing on. And then it came with a significant measure of stress. There was still the core business to run, but I was taking on responsibility for this new side of the business and managing it all. And I also had 3 young kids at the time. It really compromised a lot of things in my life. But I felt at the time that the cost was worth it. And then 2 things happened that radically shifted my course. One was I read the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. He's a fantastic
book.
Writer who writes in the Stoic tradition. And it was like you've said about my podcast, I felt about that book like he was writing directly to me. And I could see myself in the pages of that book and just how much of everything I was doing was driven by my ego and this crazy quest. And the other was attending a workshop with my friend, Philip McKernan. Actually, this was the first time I met him, that workshop. And he's now since become a friend and is soon to be a collaborator. But in that workshop, he asked a question, where are you seeking validation in your life and why? And it was somebody pulled back the veil and I realized what I was doing with my business was this really hungry quest for validation. And it was validation that I hadn't received as a child, not enough from my parents or from my peers or teachers or whatever it was. I really want the world to validate me, to tell me I'm okay, to tell me that I'm valuable, and this is how I'll do it. Those 2 things, I woke up and just realized they were not going to satisfy that need. And I had to go on an inner quest instead of this outer quest that I was on for validation and get at the core of that. And that shifted everything. And within a couple of months, I'd made the decision to sell my business. And that was a process in itself that took a couple of years. But it also, along the way, inspired the shift to what has now become Wayfinders. And there was a period there for a couple of years where I was running both businesses at the same time, but ultimately realized that I found so much more fulfillment in this current company and meaning and joy than I did with the previous one. And in my early days, when I was young and I'd started Sacred Rides, I enjoyed the heck out of it, but I'd outgrown it. And I was chasing different dreams for not necessarily psychologically healthy goals or reasons.
Did it shift because of your interest, or the business shift and migrate over because of the validation that you were seeking in terms of that growth and all that?
I want to be clear. I may have worded that like I transmuted Sacred Rides into Wayfinders. They're 2 completely different businesses. And I was running them concurrently for a bit. But I realized that I was no longer fulfilled by my previous company. I was becoming really burnt out. The goals I had set in hindsight after those kind of seismic events of introspection really felt hollow and meaningless. And it was also a period of some deep inner work, working with different guides, therapists, different means of exploration, getting at some of these core wounds that were driving that quest for validation. And the more I began to work with and heal from and release some of these old patterns, the more that need for validation just magically disappeared. It's like, I don't need validation from the external world. I can get plenty of it from within. And that's enough for me. And so then the question is, what does that mean if you're not using your business to chase validation? Because that had been my pattern for over 20 years. I'd accepted, not consciously, but unconsciously, that was what I do with business. And I approached Wayfinders from a very different perspective. Some of them were very tactical. I decided I don't want to have any staff. I don't love managing people. I want to focus on profit and cash flow over revenue. I don't need lots of revenue. I just need enough to earn a comfortable living. And I want to do stuff that aligns with my passions and my gifts. And so how do I do that? And so then I reverse engineered the business model. And the business model at that time looked like, I'm going to run 2 events. There'll be longer, deeper events. I'm going to charge a premium for this thing. I'll take 20 to 24 people. And at the end of the day, that creates a very comfortable living for me. I don't have to work like a dog to get there. And I can pour my heart and soul into these two events and the people that attend. And now that my kids are a little bit older, they don't require as much of my time. I'm slowly shifting that model. This year I'll do 3 events. Next year I'll do 4. And I have a full-time assistant. I have a marketing person or whatever, but I'm doing it very carefully. Avoid making the mistakes of the past.
Yeah. That's always the challenge, is to not go back to the old ways once we've made a shift in our values. You were talking about the profit and kind of the work-life balance. That's what I was hearing anyway. What's your order of importance of those different items when you started Wayfinders? Where was profit? Where was service? All that in your value stack?
Yeah. As I reverse engineered the business model, I said to myself, okay, this is what I would like to earn. It's a comfortable amount. It pays my expenses. I can save. I can have a few things. I don't need sports cars or anything like that, but I do want to go on a few vacations and take my kids to some interesting places. And I came up with a number, and that, of course, required further research, like what is my actual budget? What do I need in order to achieve these things? So that was the number at the end of the day. And then if you're ever been familiar with the profit first model, so it was using that and saying, okay, this is how much I want to take home at the end of the day. And this business, very simple, not a lot of operating expenses other than my salaries, a few software tools, whatever. And then how do I reverse engineer? If I'm going to run 2 events a year, because each of these is a 2-week commitment, and then I have to do some scouting or whatever, and that's the max that I want to be away from family, then what does that look like? How many people per event? What do I need to charge? What are the margins I need to achieve? And so I've adhered to that very tightly. I have very specific margin targets for event and whatnot. And what that does, it allows me to just put my heart and soul into these things without having to work like crazy in order to get there. And so that was the starting point. And then the secondary point is, what value do I need to provide in order to justify what I'm charging? And who are the people that I want to serve who are looking for that solution to it? And what is the problem that they're looking to a solution for? And so I realized I wanted to focus on entrepreneurs, because I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life. Most of the people in my peer network are entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs tend to be, in my experience, more growth-minded than the average person. And part of that is by necessity, because if you don't grow, if you don't invest in your personal growth, you will hit ceilings in terms of where you go with your business, because it requires you to grow over time. And I certainly would not be able to run Wayfinders with the same level of consciousness and awareness as when I was 24 and started my first business. Business model, who are the people I want to serve? How do I want to serve them? And how can I then develop a product or service that is going to justify the cost, that is going to provide that level of value? And so I've always approached it from the standpoint, whatever business or project, is who do I want to serve? Get a deep understanding of the problem, and then provide exceptional value. And if I focus on that, if I provide enough value, people will want to pay that, right?
Yeah.
Business is somebody's paying you because they expect value in return, and what they'll pay you is commensurate to the amount of value they expect to receive. And so the orientation has been around, how do I continue to provide that value to people? And I haven't always gotten it right, but I continue to ask the right questions to get there. And I have an incredible advisory board. And anybody who's out there, and my advisory board is made up of 5 of my best and most loyal customers, people who've done 3, 5, 6 events with me. And we meet quarterly for a couple of hours. And I'm saying this for your listeners, and I did this with my previous business as well, in which my advisory board was made up of my investors and customers, but all of my investors were customers as well. And what I've done with this advisory board is I've created an environment and an invitation to them to be just completely radically honest with me. And I've communicated through my words and my actions and my reactions that I'm okay with that level of difficult, sometimes tough to take feedback. And the result is that I get incredible information that almost nobody else would share with me from my actual customers who tell me things, because I'm certainly not getting it perfect all the time. And my actions have consequences in the world, and they experience those actions and those consequences. So when I create that environment for them to share with me, it's just absolute gold. And it lets me know where I need to step up, what I need to let go of, what I need to embrace. And so that keeps orienting me around that idea of value, providing value to my customers.
That process that you described about reverse engineering, what's my goal in terms of revenue, and what do I need to do to get there? And I actually did that with my fitness business as well. I just didn't do the last part, which is probably the most important part, is finding the problem and solving the problem and creating the value for the ultimate customers. And I think that's a part where I really want the listeners to really get into and maybe do a rewind and listen to Mike again about the process that he went through to reverse engineer and create a program that not only provides you with what you want, but also provides your customers with what they want as well.
If I can offer one more thing, is that I do this a little bit more informally now in my current business, but it was a very sort of formalized thing in my previous business, which was continually connecting with my customers.
Yeah.
And I wanted an insight into their worlds, their lives, their hopes, their dreams, the things that keep them up at night. And it was pretty simple. I had a calendar set up with a booking link, and I had slots throughout my week for people to book a call. And so when somebody signed up for one of our trips, they would get a welcome video from me, thrilled that you're here. And it was a personalized video. I had to record it every time. I said, hey, I'm super thrilled you're joining us for a trip. I can't wait to welcome you into the Sacred Rides fold. I'd love to connect with you just for 15 minutes. If you're game, here's a link to my calendar. And so I had 5 slots open per week for this. And some weeks I would only talk to 1 or 2 people. Some weeks I would talk to 5 people. But I would get it. It accomplished a number of goals. Number one, I would connect with them as human beings, and they were quite impressed that they could connect with the CEO and the owner. Number two, I would get a really good insight into their world, and who they are, their hopes, dreams, all the kind of stuff I mentioned. And number three, it would give me insight right at or right after the moment of purchase as to why they signed up. Why did they purchase my product or service? And that call would happen typically within a week or two of when they sign up. So it's fresh in their memory. And the answers were quite surprising. What we were ostensibly selling was mountain bike trips. But what those conversations revealed was that it was so much deeper. And I'd get answers like, my wife of 23 years just died, and we used to mountain bike together twice a week, and this is my way of just honoring her memory and stuff like that. Or I'm going through a divorce, and this is just a present for me, or something like these really deep, meaningful things. And it just made me realize that what we weren't selling wasn't a mountain bike trip. It was an emotional experience that people were looking for. And so you can imagine when you have a deeper understanding of that, how that might impact your messaging and your marketing and what you're selling. And there's a reason that the company was called Sacred Rides, because it used to be, back in the day when I started, there was this little company in Fernie, British Columbia, and it was called Fernie Fat Tire Adventures. But then once we started expanding around the world, that name, number one, was not appropriate, but it also didn't really hint at what we were trying to do, which was create like a sacred travel experience on a mountain bike. So all of that, we're talking about being led from the heart. This comes back to this idea of this business being led from the heart, right? Or you're not just selling a piece of software or a mountain bike trip or whatever. It's like you're selling a window into somebody's hopes and dreams and a doorway for them to pass through.
That's right. And putting the customer first, understanding their hopes, their dreams, what they value as well. That's absolute gold for any business to understand. And I think a lot of definitely profit-led businesses don't go that far into they're in love with their product. They're not in love with their customers. And Tony Robbins says that all the time. Fall in love with your customers, not your product. And I love that. The other, having the advisory board, you said you had that with the Sacred Rides as well. I think that's an amazing concept. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs can shy away from having a board that feels very corporate-y. But how do you balance having that advisory board and keeping it live and more organic than like a formal board?
Yeah. My business is unique in that I lead every event that I run. They're quite immersive. They're an experience. They're a journey that I take people through. I connect with a lot of the people who attend on a pretty profound level. Many of them have become close friends. And our board meetings and the 5 people that are on my board have all traveled together with me and developed these deep friendships. And so when we get together, it feels like a reunion of friends more so than a board meeting. And they tell me, I will usually get, after those advisory board meetings, I will get 3 or 4 messages from these 5 people saying, thank you so much for that. It was such a heartwarming couple hours to spend together. So I'm not asking them for marketing tips or whatever. It's not very corporate at all.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to get insights into, why do they keep coming back to Wayfinders, and what is the transformation that it's creating for them, and what hits really deeply, and what's missing the mark, and how do I show up best as a leader, and what ways do I still need to grow as a leader? And it's not just one way. I just pose a question, they share feedback. It's a dialogue, and some of these questions, meaningful dialogue for them to explore these same questions. So it's like equal parts friend reunion, advisory board, and therapy session, all rolled up in one. But it's extremely valuable. That's my particular context. But I'd say where people really miss the mark with whether it's a formal board meeting or an advisory board. If we're talking about a formal board, if you have a public company, you're probably not going to run a meeting like that.
Right. Exactly.
But an advisory board, and just for anybody can set up an advisory board. It's an informal thing. An actual formal board of directors is a different thing. And where people miss the mark is they focus on some very narrow aspects of business. I need help with my marketing, or I need help with financial strategy or whatever. That's really useful. But you have an opportunity, particularly if these are some of your best customers, of going deeper. And if you have that, and maybe you don't have that intimate relationship with your customers the way I do, and you can't, if you're selling a piece of software, whatever, you probably ask people to give you insight into your leadership style because they've never really interacted with you in that way, but maybe you can. But I encourage people to try and go a level deeper than just the tactical questions, because my experience has been the success of my businesses is directly tied to my willingness to grow as a leader. And the more I can grow as a leader, a lot of that growth is just confronting the baggage that operates below the surface in the subconscious that compromises our ability to show up. And I'll give you a specific example to bring that home, and then we can move on. Back when I used to do one-on-one consulting, I was consulting with this guy who led a software firm, had about 40 or 50 employees. And he was talking about how toxic the culture at his company had become, and I asked him some questions. We started digging a little bit deeper. And what emerged was this culture where nobody really talked about anything, and everybody was afraid to confront things, but then everybody just got really resentful and angry, and then they would snipe at each other behind backs or private Slack chats or whatever, instead of ever actually confronting the problem. And so I just asked him, like, hey, tell me a little bit about your home growing up. What was that like? And what revealed was this picture of an extremely chaotic household. And it was one in which he spent a lot of time hiding from the conflict, the constant conflict and yelling and screaming between his parents. And so he became extremely conflict averse, and it terrified him to ever confront issues directly. And so he would have meetings with his senior team or whatever, and he was just afraid to ever speak truth and everything. And he was always walking around with kid gloves. So you can imagine how that would filter through the office. And everybody's just walking around with kid gloves and being super passive aggressive. And so that's just an example. When you don't have anyone to point out those things, it just perpetuates for years. And then you're scratching your head as why are things like that? Your company is a reflection of you, and there's some work to be done.
100%. I think that's gold right there. The company is a reflection of you, and to do that in your work to correct whatever might be going on in that company. Yeah. That's amazing. And your journey as well is absolutely amazing also. I can't believe this time has gone by the way it has. But Mike, to tell us how we can learn more about you and Wayfinders and what you have coming up.
Yeah, thanks. So the website is way-finders.com. I'll tell you a quick funny story about that. That dash is, I looked into wayfinders.com and it wasn't being used, and hadn't been used in years. And for whatever reason, the owner wants $25,000 for that URL. And I was like, there's no way I'm paying $25,000 to remove a dash from my URL. If incoming traffic was a big traffic source, then, for lead source, then maybe, but it's not important for me. Anyway, way-finders.com. You can explore our upcoming adventures. My podcast is on there. Yes. And season 1 of the podcast is really about looking at midlife through the lens of the hero's journey. Very useful way to look at and contextualize the typical struggles of midlife. So that will give you a bit of a window into my world and how I see things. And that's probably a good starting point.
Yeah, awesome. Obviously, we met, and I'm going to be joining you guys in Egypt, and really excited about that. Why don't you give the audience just a little highlight of what Cairo or Egypt is going to be like for everybody?
Yeah. When you operate in the places where I do around the world, my most recent event, it was a very remote part of Papua New Guinea. In a month, I'm heading to Western Mongolia. And so I operate in these pretty wild places around the world. And there's a reason for that. It's because I believe it creates an emotional journey, the context for a really profound emotional and psychological and spiritual journey. And so when you operate in places like that, it's not like running a retreat in Costa Rica where everything's pretty standard and contracts and whatever. Shifting sense. So that event originally began as we were going to start in the Neom Desert of Saudi Arabia, which is a spectacular, profound desert, and then head over to the Sinai Peninsula. And then the Saudi government started making that very difficult. And then we shifted to an event that was going to take place in the Sinai. I'm just a couple of weeks into this process now, and we finally figured all of the logistical stuff out. So that we're actually going back to Neom and then cross Red Sea over to Sinai. And it's a little bit of surprising news there, but that was the original vision for it. And I'm excited that we can go back there. Just to paint a picture, the Neom Desert is this vast mountainous desert in northern Saudi Arabia and very empty. There's no people that live there, but it's one of the quietest, most spectacular places I've been to. I think the new Dune 2 parts of it were filmed there, so it might look familiar if you've been there. And we're going to be using that backdrop for sort of this idea of getting quiet so that we can listen to what's going on below and listen to the soul. And then we cross the Red Sea, and then we're joining the Bedouins of the Sinai Peninsula, and we're trekking on a remote part of the Sinai Trail over 5 days up to the summit of Mount St. Catherine, which is Egypt's highest peak, and it's right next to Mount Sinai of Ten Commandments fame.
Yeah.
And that is a region that is just really rich with history. It's important to the three major religions there. And we're going to dive in a little bit into history and this idea of pilgrimages and what are the pilgrimages my life is calling me to. And I've tried over the years to explain what it is that I do, and it's difficult, but the shorthand I've developed is the ACT model, which is adventure, community, and transformation. And that's really the heart of the experience, like a profound, deep adventure, an experience of really, deep belonging and community. And then if you embrace it, it's up to the participants if they want to embrace that journey. I can't lead them through it, but I create a context for transformation. It looks like a travel experience, but that's just the delivery mechanism.
Yeah. And from what I've gathered too in conversations that I've had with others, just the transformation alone is going to be just the true value of the program. And I'm really looking forward to it. A lot of that deep work that you've already done, I'm due for that. I've been doing that for a couple of years now, but I'm really excited about the adventure.
I'm looking forward to our time together and being together in person because we've only had pixelated.
Exactly. So when we do cross the Red Sea, do you need me to part it or?
Yeah, if you have that skill, it'd be very helpful because then we don't have to bother with a boat. We can just drive across.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's my heritage is in that region. My grandparents immigrated from Syria. So I'm really excited.
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
But Mike, thank you again for being on the show today and taking your time. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you for the conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you, show listeners, for tuning in for today's episode. Hope you got a lot out of it. And definitely check out what Mike's doing down in the show notes. We're going to link Wayfinders up in there. If you're interested in having an adventure, and contact Mike to see how to apply to be a part of that. And if you could do me a great favor, and that's to give the show a rating and review, I'd certainly appreciate that. It definitely gets the word out about the Heart-Led Business Show and helping other people realize that you can have heart, and you can have a business, and you can make profit at the same time. So until next time, lead with your heart.
You've been listening to the Heart-Led Business Show, hosted by Tom Jacobs. Join us next time for another inspiring journey into the heart of business.